So let's talk about how to be successful in the antiques and collectibles trade going forward. Because let's be realistic. We're in the year 2024. 2024 is not like it was back in 2016 when we all had access to easy money, when we had access to low interest rates, when we didn't even know what a pandemic or a COVID lockdown was back then. Then, of course, the pandemic hit. We had the wonderful era where the government doled out free money. The prices for most antiques and collectibles shot through the stratosphere. You had the great video game bubble premiering at this particular point in time. Today, in the year 2024, we're at a vastly different place when we look at the changing dynamics of the overall antiques and collectibles trade. So I'm going to give you 7 tips to keep yourself safe and sane if you are attempting to collect, speculate, deal, or heaven forbid, invest in these particular markets going forward. Now, a quick caveat here. If you are an investor in these markets like I am, you need to understand that antiques, collectibles, any type of alternate asset investment, which is what the antiques and collectibles trade is, it should never, ever be the main focal point of your investment portfolio. It should be a small percentage of that overall portfolio. In my opinion, in the opinion of other very well-versed financial individuals that I'm not going to name in this video, your primary financial portfolio should center around index funds, mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, bonds, maybe real estate, whatever you're comfortable with. But it should be centered around income-producing assets. When we talk about antiques, collectibles, when we talk about gold, silver, when we talk about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, those particular alternate asset classes should make up a very small portion overall in regards to your entire financial investment portfolio. So now that we're on the same page, I'm going to give you my top tips as to how to navigate these changing markets as we find ourselves in the year 2024. We're pretty much down the creek without a damn paddle. That's pretty much how I describe the modern era of investing in the antiques and collectibles trade. And even though I say that, guys, just understand there's still a lot of opportunity in these markets. It's just not as easy as it once was, meaning interest rates are higher. The era of easy free money is over. The era of the everything sky high in the stratosphere due to the pandemic, that era is over. So we kind of find ourselves in calmer yet more uncharted waters, if I can use that as a way to describe where we are in the year 2024 as it relates to these markets. So the first tip I'm going to give you is define yourself. Are you a reseller? Are you a collector? Are you a speculator? Are you an investor? Or are you a combination of one or the other? You have to keep this straight in your head. For instance, let me use this as an example. You guys know, if you watched any of my videos, there are certain markets that I invest in. There are certain markets that I love to collect. There are certain markets that I also speculate in. For instance, this will probably shock a lot of you. I do speculate a little bit in modern era Pokemon cards, but I invest in a lot of the vintage cards over the long term, meaning the vintage WotC era Pokemon cards. The stuff that's being produced in the modern era, I don't consider that stuff to be a good long-term hold. As a result, I go to the market, I buy it for the lowest price point possible. And when it starts to go up in value, I am quick to the draw. I will sell into the hype, I will take my profit, and I will put it in something else. Now, if I'm going to the market and I'm going after vintage Pokemon products, PSA 10 cards from the WotC era, factory seal booster boxes from that same era, my mindset is a little bit different. Because that's the stuff, if I'm going to attempt to invest in Pokemon over the long term, that's the stuff I want to buy and hold. So I want to look at that market from a different standpoint than the modern era Pokemon market, which I know is very speculative. It's being bidded up to new highs by a lot of newer collectors that are coming into these markets. Maybe they don't understand Pokemon investing. Maybe they don't understand collectible finance. Maybe they just have an attachment to Pokemon and they're buying it for a different reason other than trying to invest in it or speculate in it. But overall, I want to have a different mindset if I am an investor than that of a speculator, than that of a collector. And you can be all three, and you can understand how those mindsets work for you over the short term and over the long term. If you don't believe me, I did a whiteboard video on this talking about the different mindsets that make up the entire antiques and collectibles trade. Whether you're a speculator, a collector, an investor, a dealer, or a combination of those individual participants. Go and watch that particular video and it will help you. It's still relevant to this very day. That is a core fundamental of collectible finance that a lot of people do not think of. You have to be able to divine your participant in this market. Whatever market you're in, whether it's comic books, vintage toys, coins, currency, maybe you're into high-end artwork, maybe you're into traditional antiques, maybe you're into edged weapons, maybe you're into Magic the Gathering. You have to be able to realistically define what you are and how you're operating in that market at all times. The next piece of advice I have for you, number 2, if your collection or your investment does not have a purpose and it lacks organization, you will quickly become a hoarder. And nobody is attracted to a hoarder, guys. It doesn't matter if you're an old guy that lives in a house that was built in the 1800s that is now a historical centerpiece that is worth a couple of $1 million. If somebody walks in that house and they see all this stuff laying all over because you're addicted to just buying and collecting this stuff without organization, without purpose, I'm sorry, you probably meet the mental definition of being a hoarder. And hoarders are not sexy. Hoarders lack drive, they lack purpose, they lack accountability, and they lack organization most of all. Do not allow yourself to fall into that trap. Please make sure whatever you buy, you are starting with a written plan. Even if you're speculating in these markets, even if you're just a collector, especially if you're an investor or dealer, you need to keep written records. But if you're somebody that is coming into these markets, I would behoove you to pull out just a pen and paper and just write down what you want to accomplish, what you want to put into that collection, how much you think it's going to cost you, and then come up with a reasonable plan to acquire it. And also analyze in that same written plan how you're going to dispose of these items when the time comes. Because remember, guys, it's very easy to spend money in the antiques and collectibles trade. I want to make that very clear. All you got to do, on the lower end, you can right now get in your car, you can drive to Walmart, you can drive to Target, you can drive to any store, and you can buy Pokemon products, and you can call yourself an investor. Or, if you're somebody of means, you can log on to Heritage Auctions, you can log on to Hakes Auctions, hell, you can log on to eBay, PWCC, pick your auction company, and you can start bidding up higher-end Pokemon cards. You can put them on a credit card, they can get shipped to you, and you can call yourself an investor. Remember, it's not the amount or dollar amount of the item in question that separates you from being a hoarder or a serious investor. There are people that call themselves investors in these markets. They're honestly addicted to buying items. They're fucking hoarders with a shopping addiction. Please do not let that be you. Always have a written plan. Make sure if you are branching out in your collection, meaning maybe you're really into Pokemon cards and you really want to get into video games, just make sure it makes sense, guys. Make sure that you know what you're getting into. I often encourage people, especially people that are trying to invest in these markets, to start investing in more than one collecting market as a whole, because you're going to get a lot of knowledge and you're also going to diversify your collectible portfolio if you do that. But some of you really branch out into a lot of markets that you may not understand. For instance, if you're somebody that has been collecting pop culture collectibles for the past 10 to 20 years, and you tell me you want to get into hardcore antiques, there's going to be a learning curve there. And you got to understand the antiques market versus that of the pop culture collecting market. There's similarities there, but there's also differences. If you don't know how to navigate those differences, you're going to get slapped in the face with a stale donut, and it's going to cost you a lot of money from a financial standpoint if you're attempting to invest or even speculate in those markets. Number 3, and I got to reiterate this point, if you are buying something to add to your collections or investment portfolio, it should make sense. For instance, if you tell me, Sean, I want to go after a lot of the popular first edition holo foil cards for a lot of the popular Pokemon of the vintage coveted WotC era. If that's your goal, I should not see you then veering off course going after a PSA 10 version of a modern card. If you're telling me you want to invest, you want to speculate, you want to collect vintage first edition high grade WotC era holofoil cards, that's what your collection should contain. If you're veering off course, be very careful. You're now falling for the trap where you may be forging a new pathway to become a hoarder. Make sure that's not you. Number 4, always remember, resellers list and sell what they buy. Collectors and investors buy with a purpose. If you tell me that you're a reseller and you go to flea markets, you go to yard sales, you go to Goodwill stores, you go to thrift stores, every chance you get, and we walk into your house and you have a room overflowing with stuff you have yet to even list on eBay or whatever online marketplace you use, I really hate to say this, you have a shopping addiction and you are a hoarder. You are not playing this market wisely, because every successful reseller out there that I know that was able to build a business doing this, they understand the value of money, the time value of money, and also the cost of capital. The cost of capital means everything. If you're going to tie up $50,000 in inventory, just remember right now in the year 2024, with interest rates like they are, you can get a little over 5% just parking your money in a money market fund with virtually no risk. On $50,000 in a year's time, not even taking into account compounding interest, you understand on that $50,000, that's $2,500 just by doing nothing that you can get handed to you. Simple interest, just by putting that money in a simple money market fund, that's paying more than 5%. And there are many out there right now at the recording of this video in March of 2024 that are paying more than 5%. You have to take a strategic approach to buying and maintaining inventory. If you are a reseller, if you are a dealer, people do not understand how much carrying around dead inventory costs you if you are running a business. It is not a viable strategy going forward, especially in the overall economic business cycle environment that we find ourselves in. Next, you have to set and have a budget. I'm sorry to say this. Some of you guys come to me, you have unrealistic goals. You have what I call Ponzi dreams. Little Timmy, little Kimmy out there, they make $30,000 to $40,000 a year, and they want to build an investment portfolio in the collectible space that is worth 6 figures. It is not realistic because, again, you have to diversify into these markets. They should never, ever be the entire main course. Even if you are working to become a dealer, you should not be tying up all your money in antiques and collectibles. I am sorry. That is the wrong approach. Learn from that. This is why if we go back to a lot of my videos when the great video game bubble was going headstrong, I had little Timmies and Kimmies come at me in the comment section. Sean, I just want these 10 games. And at the time, those 10 games, graded by Wada, were selling for tens of thousands of dollars. And little Timmy or Kimmy Poindexter Jr. in the comment section made $40,000 a year, had no other assets, no other income. Where are we getting $100,000 to put together that particular collection at that point in time? And if you would have done it, if you would have borrowed money at the low interest rates back then, the collection would have dropped 60 to 80% in value, because we all know what happened with the great video game bubble. It's not realistic, guys. You have to understand there are no cash flows attached to any of these items. Even if you're investing in high-profile paintings, rare coins, whatever it is, these markets are all inherently risky, and they can change on a proverbial dime. You need to be well financed. You need to have a lot of cash flow. You need to have capital if you are attempting to invest in these markets over the long term. I can confirm that. I've been playing in these markets since the age of 12. I am now 47 years of age. I assure you, I have a lot of capital tied up in the antiques and collectibles trade. It is in the high 6 digits, just to put that in perspective for some of you. Next, always remember, an item is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. What that means is you cannot look at auction data and allow it to sway you in a way that justifies buying an item at a present point in time simply because, well, look, that auction ended for X number of dollars, therefore that item is worth X number of dollars. It doesn't work that way. We cannot look at the value of antiques and collectibles by looking at the past. You have to take into account current market dynamics, current demographics, what those demographics are going to look like 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line if you're investing long term in this. And you also have to ask the question, if I buy this at this price right now, what are the chances I can sell this and at least get my money back, should I need to, 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Remember, again, it goes back to the point I made earlier. There are no underlying cash flows in antiques and collectibles. It is pretty much what the overall buying, collecting public is willing to pay for an item at present time. I assure you, if you study comic books, you're going to see market volatility in that market. There were people that paid a premium for a lot of key vintage comic books that thought, well, gee, look at this. I was willing to pay X number of dollars for this particular comic book. If I go and sell it, I guarantee that somebody else will be out there willing to at least pay what I paid for them. We now see that particular mantra, that mentality was completely incorrect. It's no different when I go on a lot of collecting forums and a Pokemon card or a Magic the Gathering card or whatever it is, a vintage toy, will sell for a record sum. And the person that has that same item in their collection will come on the collecting forum and brag and go, look at this. This item just sold for $30,000. I have the same exact one in my collection. And they'll show a picture of it. And it is the same exact one. Well, here's the problem. Your particular item wasn't consigned to that auction. If the next one comes up for bid and it sells for less than that $30,000, your item is and never was worth $30,000 because it wasn't the one that sold for $30,000. An item is only worth what somebody is willing to pay for it in that moment of time when it comes available for sale. This is why I hear a lot of people in the Lego reselling community right now. Some of them are struggling because it's very easy to run down to your local Lego store. It's very easy to log on to www.lego.com and start spending money on Lego products. And then when they retire, if you try to sell them, if everybody else is selling that same Lego set, guess what? You're going to have a problem making a profit on it. You have to be very careful. You have to understand how these markets work. My last tip is very controversial for some of you because some of you do not want to listen to the advice of myself, to the advice of other people that are much more knowledgeable than me, people like Harry Rinker that operate in these markets. Harry Rinker once said, there is no such thing as a blue chip collectible. I 100% concur with that talking point. Just know, long-term speculation rarely works out for most people in the antiques and collectibles trade. The reason that comic books are selling for a premium right now in the year 2024. And to be fair, they're not selling as high prices as they were just 2 or 3 years ago during the COVID pandemic mania phase, but they are still selling for a premium, is simply because back in the 1950s and 60s, very few people were speculating on them. As a result, guess what? It's a simple supply versus demand equation. As time went on, as Disney acquired Marvel, as there was more mass media attention paid to comic books and comic book characters, when CGC came on the scene and started grading these particular items, marketing them as investable commodities, interest grew. People got involved in that market. That's why comic books are selling for record prices in the year 2024 and in the last 5 years or so. Back in the 1950s and 60s, people were not speculating on this stuff like they are today. Same thing's true with vintage Star Wars, certain vintage toys, Pokemon cards, even video games. You need to understand that when we look back at our lives, especially our childhoods, a lot of us are under the assumption that everything that we loved as a child is now selling for a record price. And if we would have just hoarded and saved all this stuff, we'd be sitting on a mound of cash. I assure you, I am a consultant in the antiques and collectibles trade. I have decades of experience in these markets. I meet a lot of older people that saved everything from their childhood. Are you aware they would have done, in some cases, 10 to 20 times better if they would have just put that money in a well-diversified financial portfolio or even an S&P 500 index fund? The majority of the items they are holding did not appreciate, like vintage 12-back Star Wars figures, certain key comic books from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, certain Pokemon cards that you could have bought back in the 1990s. Also, remember, if you are attempting to hoard this stuff over the long term, you have to keep it in as immaculate as condition as possible to reap the best rewards. Harry Rinker, on his website, www.harryrinker.com, if you go and you read some of his columns, you will see his advice to people that attempt to speculate in these markets over the long term. It is not positive. I, believe it or not, am more bullish than Harry Rinker in relation to a lot of these markets, especially in the year 2024. And I'm here to tell you, use caution. The antiques and collectibles trade is a valid alternate asset class. But what you need to know in closing here is that the market dynamics are constantly changing and evolving. This is why I would be the first to tell you the only thing that matters going forward in the entire antiques and collectibles trade, it is not supply, it is demand. Demand is what you have to look forward to if you are attempting to invest in these markets today and you want to make a profit 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years later. Because remember, you are not attempting to predict the market as it is today if you are buying an antique or collectible today for investment purposes. What you are doing is you are akin to options trading in Wall Street, which is never a good idea because you're betting on time. You are hoping that if you buy that rare coin, that rare comic book, that uncommon Pokemon card, that Alpha Edition Magic the Gathering card, what you are hoping is that someone in the future, demand is going to increase for that item, where when they come into that market, they're going to be willing to pay a premium, more than what you originally paid in the year 2024 to acquire that same item, now maybe in the year 2034, 2044, or even 2054, depending on what your long-term horizon is. That is inherently risky. That is why, again, I'm going to close the video this way. You cannot put all of your money in alternate asset classes. It doesn't matter if it's collectibles, antiques, gold, silver, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. The only free lunch in investing is known as diversification. Use it to your advantage, and I assure you, if you want to become an investor in these markets, the markets will reward you that much more. Thank you for watching. Have a good night. I'm curious as to your thoughts in the comment section below, and I will see you sometime in the next video.